Hello and welcome to the show. I am so excited to talk today about a topic that I think I have been helping leaders wrestle with for more than 20 years. And it came up again in a coaching session this week, and I thought I might as well share it with the audience because I figure if you're listening to this, you're a leader, you're in an organization where you're aspiring to be a leader or a manager of people one day. And so I thought this would be a good one to hit. And if you are new to the show, hello, my name is Catie Campbell. I am a certified executive coach, and I like to say C-suite whisperer sometimes too. I've been working with leaders for more than 25 years. I've worked with more than 25,000 leaders across every industry you can think of, helping solve gnarly and then sometimes very, very simple problems or seemingly simple problems. And today's topic is on feedback, but not in how you deliver feedback. So here's the situation. Let me set you up with what my coaching client brought to me. And again, I've heard this for many, many years, but just because it's recent, I thought it was relevant to share. So we're going to call him Tom, not his real name, but Tom came to me this week. He's a very senior leader in a company. He's a terrific leader. So let me just preface this up front. He's got a really large organization, runs about a $500 million company. He's been in his industry for a long time. He's been a leader for a long time. And the company's growing. And so he's really concerned about making sure that he's bringing the team along. And he came to me and said, look, Catie, I don't know how my team really feels about me. But what I heard from my leader, who is basically the CEO of the company, is that I need to make sure that I'm building trust and bringing people along. And I'm not really sure if I'm doing that or if I'm doing that really well. So as we started to unpack it, and I started to ask him a lot of questions, I basically said straight up, like, when was the last time you ever asked for feedback from your direct reports? And he kind of looked at me with a blank stare, and he's like, well, I always say I have an open door policy and that I'm open to feedback, receptive to feedback. And I said, okay, but that doesn't answer the question. When was the last time you asked for their feedback? And he said, I can't remember. I haven't done it formally. Okay, so there is a technique that I've been a supporter of over the years of senior leaders asking their direct reports for feedback in a very formal way on a consistent basis. And it can be something as simple as you send an email out ahead of time before like a development conversation or a one-on-one that asks simple questions like, what's something that I could do more of? What's something that I could do less of? What's something that you'd want me to stop, start, or continue doing that's effective or not effective? And then how could I be a better colleague to you? So you send those out in an email like a day or two before you're going to have the conversation. It allows everybody time to prepare. And then hopefully in that conversation, your direct report is willing to give you feedback or just share what's been on their mind. Oftentimes when you start doing this, if you decide, hey, this is a great tool, yeah, I'd love to know the answers to those questions from my team, you won't always get every single person on your team to answer all the questions, number one. And number two, some people might not feel comfortable right off the rip answering those questions. So what I always share with leaders is give it a couple of cycles. So it might take you a full year of working with somebody to really get them comfortable with giving you the feedback and helping you to integrate that into your leadership practice. So we said, yeah, Catie, that's absolutely something that I can do. But he said, I don't know. I'm not used to giving my boss feedback. And I thought, okay, wait a minute, hang on. So after the coaching session's over, we'll go back to how we landed the plane with him on that one. But I just started thinking about what percentage of people in organizations are used to giving upward feedback to their managers. So I, of course, went to one of the best sources possible, Gallup, and Gallup has historically been the organization that helps companies measure employee engagement, culture, leadership capacity, capability, that sort of thing in companies. They're like one of the gold standards. So went to Forbes. I've got a study from 2024 that we will share in the show notes. You'll have a link to that study. And I was amazed. So their study said that only 42% of U.S. employees, and so if you're listening globally, I get it, but I wouldn't be surprised that this is more common globally. Only 42% of U.S. employees report ever having the chance to formally provide feedback to their manager. I was blown away because I believe I've worked in several organizations before I went out on my own to that where we had to give formal feedback. It was something that was a part of an annual review that you would do something for your supervisor. And like I said, I had the technique I was talking about earlier that came from a supervisor that I worked with years ago. So doing upward feedback is not odd to me, but less than half of employees ever have the opportunity to give their manager feedback. So it's conceivable that Tom is just worked in organizations that fall within that bucket, and it's for whatever reason, it's just not something that's been required. And then the study went on to say that only 24% have formally rated their manager's performance. So this isn't like sitting in a meeting and someone saying, hey, Catie, tell me how I'm doing. This is actually putting it on paper, having it measured, having it documented somewhere. That seems alarming to me because I think about it from the leader's perspective. Now they're sort of shooting in the dark. They're just operating based on instinct and what their intuition or what they think might be the best case of like how to run their team or how to build trust or, how to lead people. And without getting that reciprocity, getting that feedback, they're just blindly operating as opposed to strategically doing things that are going to help support the team's momentum or their development or just, being successful as a group. On top of that, so I'm feeling bad for Tom. I'm just like, oh man, so he doesn't have any expertise in doing this. He doesn't have any experience doing this himself. I totally understand why he's not used to it. But a related data point is that only 36% of managers receive peer feedback through any formal process. So not only is he's got a couple of other vice presidents that he sits alongside of, so he's not even like learning from them. Is he being a good teammate? Is he being a good colleague? So literally in this organization, like I said, very successful. It's growing, $500 million company. It's going to be $1 billion company within 18 months. So they're doing great. And they are really operating from, I think, a very risky leadership perspective because they don't know if the leaders are doing the things that are really going to help the workforce. And the great people they have on board want to stay with them to grow it into that bigger company. So then I got to thinking, okay, so why does this really happen? And there's a couple of reasons why I suspect the formal feedback doesn't happen. Because formal feedback requires documentation, it requires a process, it requires time, and it also requires you to like bring in HR, things go on your permanent record, and there's just an allergy to doing that across the board. And I totally get that. If I'm struggling as a leader, I'd rather have my colleague come to me and say, hey, or one of my direct reports come to me and say, hey, Catie, this is how you could be better. And me fix it, tweak things, and we keep the ball moving forward. Once you get HR involved and we've got stuff documented, now it feels punitive. Like, oh, well, back in March, Catie wasn't leading her team really well. And so when you get to your annual performance review, that's going to come up and you might have already course corrected the issue. It might no longer be an issue with your team or with that particular direct report. So I can see why people, and especially organizations, typically shy away from doing that. But at the end of the day, we all say that we want feedback, and I think nine out of 10 people actually do. One of the ways that we're motivated intrinsically is through getting better at something, right? We want to be autonomous. We want to feel like we're connected or that we belong or a part of a bigger mission or a vision. And we're intrinsically motivated to do things when we feel like we're getting better at them. So roll it back to Tom. So I said, okay, so talk me through the times when you've asked people for feedback. Nothing formal. We haven't done this upward feedback thing yet. Just asking them for feedback. What do you get? So after a little bit of thinking, he was like, I don't get a whole lot. And I said, okay, so give me an example of some feedback that you got recently. And he said, well, it's been a while. I mean, I ask for it all the time, and everyone's like, no, Tom, you're doing great. You're doing great. And he said, I don't know what great means. I said, yeah, okay. He's getting a little defensive, and I thought, that might be something. And so I kept asking him a little bit more. I'm like, but think back. When was the last time you got feedback? And it was like, well, I got feedback from Steve. And I know that historically Tom and Steve have not gotten along really well. They just kind of don't. They're a little bit oil and water. But Steve offers a lot to the team and to the company. Tom's really grateful to have Steve's expertise. They just, from a personality dynamic, don't get along super well. And so he got some feedback from Steve, and I said, how did you take that? He's like, well, you know how Steve is. And I said, I know Steve, by the way. I said, yeah, I know how Steve is. So what does that mean? And he's like, well, you know, I mean, if it's coming from Steve, Steve and I don't get along really well. Steve doesn't really respect me. I don't think Steve really likes me that much. We just don't get along. And I said, so the feedback that he gave you, what was it? And so he described the feedback, and it was something that was, I think, pertinent and something that Tom could really use some work on, and he could probably do better at it. But he was completely dismissing what he got from Steve because of who it was coming from. And I just said, okay, herein lies part of the problem. Because although we all say that we want to get feedback, a lot of times we want feedback the way that we want it, not the way that it's going to come. So he wants feedback. Tom wants feedback on his performance. So the thing that Steve pointed out to him was something that multiple people on the team easily could have pointed out as well. But Steve was the one that got asked, and Steve was the one that told him. So it's a pattern for Tom. But because it came from Steve, he doesn't like it. But if it came from Megan, and Megan said, oh, Tom, you know, you're doing this thing and people don't really like that, or you're doing this thing and it's causing us problems, he would have been like, oh, thanks, Megan. I really appreciate it, because he and Megan get along really well. They jive. They have like complementary personalities. So we often dismiss feedback if we don't like where it's coming from, even if it's true. And so I walked him. So I actually had him replay, like, give me the role play of what the conversation between you and Steve sounded like. And so Tom obliged, and he's working me through the conversation. And I could see through the Zoom that Tom was getting defensive in how he responded to Steve. Now, he's thinking, I did great. I asked for feedback and stuff. But what he did immediately was start to defend his behavior to Steve. So, of course, what is Steve going to do? I'm not going to give him feedback again. I'm not going to be honest with him. And because Tom didn't change his behavior, because I know, because I work with some of his teammates, he's still doing the same thing that's driving people crazy. What is Steve going to do? It's like, oh, I'm going to give you feedback and you won't do anything with it. Cool. I'm going to give you nothing. So instead of defending himself or justifying himself or explaining himself, which is what he did, he's like, no, I explained to Steve why I do this specific thing. And I gave him all of these reasons why it's so important for me to do this thing. What's he doing? He's explaining, he's justifying, he's defending himself. And Steve picked it out right away. So he's not going to respond. And what does this do over time? It creates a problem on multiple different levels. So yes, this is just between Tom and Steve. But if this is happening with one person, it's probably happening elsewhere. I suspect if I talked to some of Tom's colleagues, they would probably give me some feedback that he wouldn't want to hear. If I asked his boss about some things that, like, just give me a rundown on his performance or where could he improve, he would get feedback that he wouldn't like either. And so what does this do over time? So when we defend, block, over-explain, justify when we're given feedback, number one, it creates separation between me, you, and the other person. So if you've ever caught yourself doing this, just know that that person's going to distance themselves from trusting that they can give you honesty, what you're asking for. And so that second word is important too. So you're creating distance, but now you've created a sense of mistrust. Like, I don't trust that you're going to actually honor what I'm telling you. I don't trust that you're going to care about the feedback that I'm going to give you. And I don't trust that you're going to do anything with it, even if it's true. Even if you acknowledge that it's true, you're not going to do anything with it. So now we're creating separation between the leader and their direct reports. We're now eroding the trust that was there. And the cost is massive. So when I talk to leaders and they are asked by their organization, or they just say, hey, I want to be somebody who's known as trustworthy. I want to be known as someone who's got an open door policy, or people can come to me with their problems or their situations, and I'm going to help them. In this scenario, Steve's not going to do that. And in fact, if I went and talked to Steve and said, tell me about Tom, tell me about your relationship, like, how do you feel about working with him? After about 10 or 15 minutes in a conversation, Steve is going to open up and tell me, I don't know if I can really trust him. I don't know if I can really trust his decisions. I don't know if I really like working with him. I don't think he really likes working with me. So now we've created this scenario where Steve is off here on an island, not with the rest of the group, and he is not going to take leadership, direction, no matter how good it is, from Tom, because Tom ruined that just by dismissing the feedback. And so what happens over time is that the Steves of the world stay hidden. They just clam up. They don't offer up feedback. They don't offer up suggestions. They don't offer up solutions to things because they feel like they're going to be dismissed. They feel like they can't trust that what their contribution is actually going to be taken seriously. And it seems like such a small thing. So if you're listening to this and you're like, oh, come on, Catie, just that's one interaction. How can that be the tipping point? I am here to tell you that every single time I have gone into a company, and this is over 20 years, I can't tell you hundreds of companies at this stage of the game, and you go in and I'm poking around figuring out what the culture's like or figuring out why a leader is struggling with things like trust and bringing people along. It's because of these little micro scenarios. And maybe it doesn't happen the first time, but I know that Tom and Steve have had issues for more than a year because they've worked together, I think, for 2 now. So for more than a year, I know that all these micro situations have been happening. And so why on earth would Steve say, yeah, I trust that Tom's going to make good decisions on my behalf? When Tom goes to give Steve his performance review and his bonus and his raise, do you think Steve looks at that and says, yeah, I was given a fair shot? The answer is no, absolutely not. And so it's these tiny little interactions over time that erodes trust in a big way. And so when I go into a company and they say we have a problem with trust, or we want to build more trust, or we want to build a culture of feedback and continuous improvement and high performance, but you look at a culture survey and it says that they don't trust the leadership, it's all these micro interactions. So at the end of the day, it's hard to be perfect every single time. And that's not what I'm asking anybody to do. But if you are listening to this and you're like, ooh, I might have done some things in the past with someone on my team, or maybe it's a current teammate that you have that would possibly be a Tom and Steve scenario. This is a good time just to do a gut check and say, okay, the next time I'm asking for feedback or somebody says, can I offer you some feedback or some advice? What is it that I want to do? And so how do we start doing this? Okay, so I want you to think back on a couple of let's just say the last few weeks or months when you've asked for feedback from someone, or they've just they've given it to you without solicitation, like just offered it to you. What happened in that interaction? Did you get really curious about what their experience was, or did you get defensive? Did you start to ask them questions so that you really understood the feedback in a way that would help you integrate change in the future? Or did you start to explain or justify or defend what it was that you were doing in the first place, or what it was they're giving you feedback on? Because trust isn't built when you say things like, you can be honest with me. Trust and reciprocation around feedback happens when somebody gives you the feedback and you listen with curiosity, you listen with an intent to understand, and you listen with an intent of appreciation. So in this scenario with Tom and Steve, do I think it could be fixed? 100%. Who needs to go first? It's an obvious answer. It's Tom needs to go first. And really what we talked about and how we sort of concluded the coaching session was he's going to do some reflection on that whole interaction with Steve, and he's going to try and set up a couple of conversations in the future, not all at once, to talk through not, hey, do you have any new feedback from me, but Monday morning quarterbacking what happened the last time they got together. So now that Tom's had this sort of awakening of, oh, it's my behavior that's preventing people from giving me honest and true feedback, he can start to do the repair work with Steve that may or may not work. It might be that the trust is eroded so badly that it can't be recovered. Oftentimes I find that when you are humble and honest and genuine, that people are willing to give you a second chance, especially if then your actions and your words are aligned. Meaning once Tom gets out of that room, he takes the feedback, he integrates it, he follows up with Steve and says, thank you again. And he, is open and receptive and curious the next time Steve or anybody else offers to give him feedback. So if this is you, this is a great point of reflection. If you really, truly want feedback from your team, if you want to know how to grow as a leader, or if you are not in a leadership position yet, but what you're trying to do is get yourself ready for this. Anytime somebody gives you feedback, it could be about your driving or a dish you prepared for dinner or something like that. It doesn't have to be in a formal leadership capacity. I want you to think about, are you going to defend and explain and push back, or are you going to be open, curious, receptive, and appreciative? So that's our show for today. I would love to hear some of your feedback in the comments because I actually want to hear it, even if you think this is garbage. I want to hear your feedback because I always integrate what I learn from people on social media and people through this podcast. I integrate what I'm hearing from you about how to make the shows better, how to bring you relevant topics, and absolutely how I can be better for you. So thanks so much for listening, and we'll catch you next time.